Welcome to Self-Publishing with ALLi from the Alliance of Independent Authors. This week, it's our advice stream focusing on branding, marketing, and promotion. Join host Dale L. Roberts as he interviews the brightest minds, experts, and insiders in the writing and self-publishing business. Get actionable insights to help you level up your author brand and reach more readers. This Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast is sponsored by Book Vault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with Book Vault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. And here's your host, Dale L. Roberts.
Are you an aspiring children's book author wondering how to break into the market? Or maybe you've already published a book but can't seem to get it into the hands of young readers. If that sounds like you, stick around because today's guest has cracked the code on self-publishing and marketing children's books successfully. Welcome to the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast, where we help indie authors navigate the world of branding, marketing, and promotion. I'm Dale L. Roberts, and this is my monthly segment where we tackle the toughest questions about growing your author brand and getting more books into readers' hands. Today, I'm joined by Karen Inglis, a self-published children's author who has sold well over 500,000 books worldwide. She's the mastermind behind The Secret Lake and How to Self-Publish and Market a Children's Book. Karen is here to share her expertise on what it really takes to succeed in the children's book market today. From writing compelling stories for kids to nailing book marketing strategies that actually work, Karen has done it all. If you want to know how to build a lasting career as a children's book author, you won't want to miss out on this conversation. So welcoming to Self-Publishing with ALLi, Karen Inglis. How you doing?
Very well, and thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here, and I happened to be in London Book Fair when the Alliance of Independent Authors was founded back in 2012. So I've been with the group quite a long time, so
wow.
It's nice to be here.
You've been here for longer than a cup of coffee, so... That's good. That's good. And this is definitely further proof of your expertise in being in this business and your staying power. So I'm sure a lot of the advice you're going to, dispense today is definitely going to be something everybody should take note on. So let's start out with like the easy softball question. What's the biggest mistake new children's authors make when publishing their first book?
Well, I would imagine it might go back to almost writing your first children's book. A mistake some can make is perhaps not doing enough research to start with. And I'm not saying everybody does this, but it is something that I know from experience in terms of when children's authors have sometimes written to me and said, I've got my first children's book, would you be prepared to read the draft? And I don't do that anymore because I have had quite a lot of requests. But often when I start to read it, I think, who is the audience for this book? So the age range, the target age range, you really do need to know who you're writing for, because that influences so much about the language and the characters and the length of the book and all that sort of thing. And so I think there's a temptation, if you think you want to write a book, to think that perhaps writing a children's book could be the simple way. But you really need to aim it at a particular target market, and that will influence actually not just the characters, but actually the age of the kind of characters who are in there to begin with. I mean, I've had people send me drafts where there were grown-ups talking about financial stuff in the background, and I was just saying, well, that's not part of a children's book. So that could be a mistake that some people might make to begin with. And then I suppose the other obvious one, and it's not just children's books, would be not testing the story and making sure that the story works, and not using professional editors, that sort of thing. Yes, so the usual professional approach to things.
So many authors struggle to market children's books. What are some key strategies that have worked for you?
Okay, I mean, the one thing I would say, and I stick to my guns on this, I've always said it, and interestingly, in recent months, I've been hearing a lot of podcast people talking on, which is nothing to do with children's books, about the importance of establishing your brand actually locally. And I would just say, when you're starting out, I say that is the big thing to do. You've got to start small because first of all, it helps you build your confidence. So let's assume you've got the right story, you've tested it, it's good, and you've got a professional looking product. You want to start networking locally and finding, in my case, I started with a combination of my local library, my local bookshops, and local schools, and slowly introduced the story that way. And I even used my local library, in fact, when I was first self-publishing it, to say, look, I've got this new book. Do you think you'd be able to find some local children who might be interested to read it? I can provide 10 copies for nothing. I'd love their feedback, if you know what I mean. And because that starts to build the word of mouth, and you get the feedback, which is confidence building. I did a reading in that local library. Nice. I chatted with the owner of the local bookshop, who agreed to stock them on a consignment or sale or return basis. And then I also contacted my local press, because there was a sort of local connection. I'm the local author, but actually The Secret Lake was inspired by partly inspired by a pond in Richmond Park, which is close to where we live, which a lot of the families would have known. So that was a good local story. And that you then start to get word of mouth. And crucially, and this was, back in the day, it was much harder to find ways of getting reviews, but it did mean that I was able to ask some of those children who'd read it early on and talk with their parents, would there be a chance they could put a review on Amazon for me, and also one of the local family magazines. And so you just start to build your confidence, get the word of mouth going. And then when you go to more schools, that you're seeing quite a lot of children in one go, and you think the ball starts to get rolling. But it's a gradual process, and I think you need it for your confidence as well when you're first starting out. And I mean, when I first started out, Amazon advertising wasn't available. So although my books were on Amazon, The Secret Lake was there, but nobody knew it was there. It sold a few copies, but not many, because people didn't know it was there. So I was forced to do this local thing. But, actually, when I came to write my book about self-publishing, in my mind, it was still a very important part of the marketing. And word of mouth, is very important, as well as the local press. Yeah.
You've mentioned like a few resources that we can reach out to, libraries, local media, and the like. Who would be the key figures that we need to approach for something like this? So for instance, if I'm going to the library and I'm wanting to get some type of placement in the local library, do I just go to any librarian, or do I need to speak to like a branch manager of some sort? What does that process look like for you?
I think it would be going in and finding out, speaking with the person who perhaps is in charge of the children's area. If they are, maybe they're just in charge of the whole library, to find out, do they do story time? Okay. And offer to come and read the book for free. They won't normally, but certainly here in the UK, I think if you go and offer, will you stock my book? They often won't. They sort of they like to order it through their centralized system, because I think perhaps they may risk getting overwhelmed, and they want to be sure that they want to take the book to begin with. But, it is one of those things which, in my case, it's establishing that relationship. And they were quite excited, when I eventually did a reading there. They had tea and cakes.
Oh, man. How
For the people that came along, they put up little flags and everything. I still have a photo from that. I was really nervous. But yes, I think it is a question of going in, meeting them, and certainly bookshops, going in, finding out, talking to them about what you've got. Yeah. In terms of schools, which is another key thing, is it's quite difficult contacting schools. They're very busy, and it's very easy to get discouraged because, you talk to the wrong person, or they say, yes, this person will email you, and then you never hear back, and then you chase it, and then they say, oh, that teacher left 3 weeks ago, Yeah. But what I do say in my book is, actually what you discover ultimately when you do go and do these school visits is they're just all incredibly busy. Yeah. And so you have to have a bit of a thick skin when you're contacting them, but always be very polite. Don't overwhelm them with too much information to begin with. Perhaps a link to your website, a couple of thumbnails of your books in the email, but call first to find out who the literacy coordinator is, because it might be the librarian, it might be a teacher from year 3, and hopefully see if you can get the email address to them. Sometimes you come across quite protective office managers who want everything to go to them, So but you just have to. The customer's always right. You just have to go with it.
You mentioned a lot about confidence. Now, I'm a bit of an introvert. I sometimes find myself feeling overwhelmed. If you were to say, Dale, I'm going to get you to go to the local library, and you're going to go speak to somebody who's in charge of the children. Oh my gosh. How do I build that confidence enough that I can go in there and execute on something like that?
Well, perhaps if you're worried about doing it, you just can go in not to do that and just eye them up and see what the atmosphere is like and so on. And usually what happens is when you meet all these people, they're perfectly lovely people, they're just lovely individuals. And in fact, I'm at the moment in the middle of, we have some World Book Day week coming up here in a few weeks, and I'm fielding emails left, right and centre. And I'll show you this, but no one else will see it. I mean, that's my visits I've got at schools coming up.
Oh my gosh.
For World Book Day, and trying to keep track of the names and who I'm seeing at what day, what time. I won't even go there. And the fact one's an Alice, one's an Eleanor, and I'm trying to picture all these people. And when you're starting out all these conversations, you're thinking, I wonder what this person's like. They all turn out when you meet them to be lovely individuals. Yeah. So there's not really, it tends to be in one's mind, I think. But, if one's worried about it, something like a library visit, or go to the place first and sort of suss it out.
Yeah, so just show up first and then take the initiative to do that. I think that's great.
And also, I'd also pick a time, find out when it's a good time to, if it's not obvious, find out when's a good time to go. Don't go in when it's really busy or, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Very interesting. In your experience, what's the most effective way for authors, at least children's book authors, to build their brand and reach more parents and teachers and librarians? Because obviously we've talked about going and doing some of this outreach. What are some other ways that we can think about doing this?
Reaching teachers and parents, reaching parents and pupils and teachers is really by booking in the school visits and going and doing those school visits. I mean, obviously particularly since COVID, you can also offer online visits, that you can do virtual visits. So, I have done, I've done quite a few to America, actually. I've done, whole schools in, Chicago area, that kind of thing. So on your website, I mean, one thing that goes without saying, I suppose, is that as with adults, authors of adult books, I have a website, and make sure that on your website you have a section called school visits, where again, if you're sharing details about your books, if a teacher happens to see it and you're using social media, you can refer people there as well, so they can read up about you and so on. And now I've forgotten what the original part of your question was.
And what's the most effective way for children's book authors to build their brand and reach more parents, teachers, and librarians?
Yeah. Well, I just think it is by going in and meeting them and booking those visits. I think, there is, and that starts with emailing them, doing your research, finding out schools. I mean, if you live in a metropolis, it's quite good because, for example, in London, to start with, I did most of my visits locally in London because they're easy to get to. Yeah. I now go further out, and there are websites. So here in the UK, we have a website called Contact an Author, which if you look that up, contactanauthor.co.uk, and I'm sure there are equivalents in the States where authors can register and teachers go there to find authors for school visits. Now, some of them are gatekeepery and they will only let you join if you're traditionally published. Yeah. But things like Contact an Author are not, and you can list your books and talk about what you would do in your school visit and so on. So, that's another way that you can, and just Google organizations for author visits to schools. That would be, another way to do it.
What a great resource. I'm glad I asked you that question.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of transition here and shift just a little bit into like the back end of stuff. How important is metadata, categories, and keywords for children's books? And what's your approach to optimizing them? Because obviously it's very overwhelming and it plays a large part in our positioning ourselves on the marketplace.
Yes, yeah. Well, very, very important when you're uploading your book to Amazon actually and to the other stores they ask you now for the age range, so make sure you put that age range in, whether it's middle grade, whether it's 3 to 5, it might be, they ask you actually from age and I think it's class, because I remember I always have to Google to remind myself what the year groups are in America because, it's all different terminology. Yeah. So make sure you do that. Then in terms of categorizing, it's just the same as it is for adult books, which is to go in, look at the categories and just choose the ones that are most relevant for you at the most granular level you can. Yeah. Now, again, back in the early days, we didn't have things like Publisher Rocket, but I would highly recommend that for going in, just because you can go in and use it and you can see the categories more easily than sort of trawling through yourself, so to speak. So in terms of that, it is very important. And you know, for example, The Secret Lake, that's time travel, and it's also historical fiction, and that all comes under children's books. So you drill down and you find the most relevant. Don't be tempted to go for something that's not relevant, because it just doesn't help in search. Yeah. And in the same way as with other books, when you're writing your book description, I always tend to make sure somewhere in there I mention what age group it's aimed at, even though that's sort of covered in the back end at the categories. Yeah. And then when I come to do things like advertising, Amazon ads, I mean, most of my ads sort of just run along on their own now, but in those early days when I was setting them up, I did a lot of sort of painstaking research on what I felt would be good keywords. I looked a lot at, in terms of comp books, which books I might target as being similar genre to mine, but also in terms of, and again, this is where Publisher Rocket is really good now. You can look at phrases people might use, and typically that will fall into two sorts of things like books for girls age 10, books for girls age 8 to 10, that sort of thing, and so you're kind of doing that way, that the sort of age and gender related. Okay. And then another sort of area might be to do with the sort of book it is. Yes, time travel book for kids, mystery books for kids, that sort of thing. Again, just thinking as you do when you're advertising adult books, what would a parent who was looking for a book for their child go in and put into search? But with the addition of things like Publisher Rocket now, they will probably tell you how often those search terms are used, if you know what I mean.
So with the keywords, when you're building out your keywords on this, you're using Rocket, obviously, but are you entirely relying on just age-specific keywords? In other words, children's books for ages 4 to 6. Maybe we mentioned the niche. It could probably be, I'm not familiar with too many children's books. Picture books for 4 to 6 year olds, something like that.
If it was picture book, you probably would say picture book.
Right.
But in terms of things like the middle grade novel, which The Secret Lake is, I wouldn't be sort of saying, I would be going for either your key. What I tended to do, and again, because these ads have been sitting doing their own thing for quite a long while now, and I don't go in all the time mucking around with them, but that I tended to group them into the books by genre. So it might be, adventure books, age 8, mystery books, age 8, historical fiction, and maybe with the age, and then a separate one, which would be books for boys, books for girl. I tended to sort of group them into I'm telling a lie. I'm getting myself confused now because it's been a while since I've done it. I would probably group all that lot together and then separately have an ad that would be targeting similar books by title. Gotcha. So in other words, it's The Secret Garden or whatever. Or now you can run things like called ASIN ads, where you actually are targeting the ASIN number, the Amazon the Amazon product number. Yeah. You can run those sort of product ads as well, can't you?
Yep.
So you kind of to me, it just was more logical to say, well, that's my ad that's running all the sort of genre, and then that one's to do with search terms, like I'm looking for a picture book for my 3-year-old,
Yeah. With the marketplace, it's getting so packed. There's so much competition. How can new children's authors really stand out and build a loyal readership now? Because, boy, there's a lot of children's books on the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult. And I would come back again to make a strong local impression to begin with and build your fan base that way. I think that's the thing to do. Be yourself and I mean, just reach out, offer things to, through your website, you can do things like have downloads that people can download excerpts of your books or puzzles or anything to do with your own books. I mean, those kind of innovative ways of sort of getting people to engage with you. I mean, the trouble with all of this is that as children's authors, we're not allowed to communicate directly with, we're not allowed to market directly to children. We can't have a newsletter that children are reading because of GDPR and the data protection. And so everything is sort of through the filter of the adult. So it's far more challenging. But, I just think you've just got to slightly think outside the box. And again, I keep coming back to the sort of your local brand will help you start getting feedback from children and parents locally, which you can then use in your own marketing. And, for example, create, I would say tweets in the olden days, but it's probably more likely to be somewhere like Instagram now, where you can have, I have pictures of children who've read my books and they've been so excited, and their parent has said, "Oh, here's a picture of my daughter with your book." And I said, "Would you mind if I shared that? Would you mind if I share that on my social media?" I always ask, and they usually say yes. And so I'm able to share on my Instagram a picture of someone holding a copy of The Secret Lake who's just read it and some sort of quote from her about what she thought about it. Equally, I get from Germany now, I get sent in quite often that the German children do book projects, and they send me in pictures of the German edition of The Secret Lake that they've done this fantastic project on. And I always say to the parents, "Would you mind if I put that on my social media?" So you sort of have to think nimbly about, wherever there's an opportunity, get permission and see if you can share that as a way of connecting with other parents or teachers who might see that post. And in doing that, again, coming back to the usual, use hashtags which are likely to attract readers of children's books or teachers. And those hashtags might just be things like middle grade fiction or a key stage 1, which is a teaching, what do you call it? Like it might be 4th grade books or something like that, where the people are looking for that sort of content might come across your post if they're not following you already. Sort of going a little bit all over the place, but I hope that sort of gives some sort of feel.
Yeah, for sure. We've covered so many aspects, everything from local. You're very much into that, and I love that. You've sold over 500,000 books, though, and I'm kind of wondering, is that all local or is that attributed to?
Okay, right. So the 500,000 plus, in fact, it's probably approaching now about 750,000.
Well done. Nice job.
Well, yeah, because my I think last time I looked at my Amazon sales of The Secret Lake, they were coming up towards 600,000.
Nice.
But that's just Amazon sales. I also sell, obviously, through Ingram Spark, and when I do my school events, I order stock and that sort of thing. Now, that very high number, and I have to say, is because of the story. It has to be the story.
Okay.
I just can't, it's nothing that I've done that's some magic sauce. And it's just built but a lot, I just think a lot of it is also word of mouth because the children enjoyed the story.
So it didn't
and they're
start
telling
that
other
way.
children.
It's just this way from years of really working at it.
Yeah. So to give you the potted history, it came out that The Secret Lake, the first book, because there are 3 of them now, that came out I self-published it in, I think it was something like August 2011, when nobody had sort of done anything. It really then came out properly, I managed to get the physical book onto Amazon in 2012. Okay. And between 2012 and 2017, 18, I'd sold 7,000 copies. Okay. Yes. And that was mostly through what I was talking about earlier, through school events, through local book signings.
That's real good.
Word of mouth with like Waterstones, which is the sort of the equivalent of Barnes and Noble, I suppose. My local Waterstones, I'd gone in, I'd said this is the local story. So I did signings with them, and it wasn't a question of people queuing outside the door. I was there all day on a Saturday, and as parents came in with their children, I said, could I interest you and tell you a little bit about The Secret Lake? It has this local. So I was building it up that way. I got invites to do other events and school events. But what changed, the game changer, was Amazon advertising, allowing independent authors to advertise. Now, when that happened, because of that earlier work I'd done, I actually had something like, which felt great at the time. I think I had something like 30 reviews on Amazon, 30. Mm-hmm. And so I actually had some reviews. And so when I started to advertise the book, and I was quite careful with my book description, it did I could see it starting to sell. Very quickly it started to sell because finally people could see it. They didn't know it was there before because only traditionally published authors were allowed to advertise. And then what happened, that I think the really big game changer was the fact that it took off in the States, because obviously there's a much bigger market there. Yeah. And that took a long time, because in those days they didn't share the reviews. And I remember for a long time it had very few reviews, and then somebody came along and gave it 1 star because when she'd received it, the print was all upside down or something.
Oh gosh, something you can't even help.
And so I know, and so it went down to being 3 stars, and I just started advertising in America, and I had to just sit it out. And the worst thing was, in those days, and here's a tip: they don't let you do it now, but you were allowed to comment on reviews then.
I remember that.
And I made the mistake of commenting and saying, "I'm so sorry. In fact, this is an Amazon. I'll be very happy to send you one, but if you contact anyway." And then some other people replied, and then what happened was Amazon kept promoting this 1-star review to the top of the pile
because you were engaging with it.
Oh goodness!
You're like, when does this nightmare end?
I know, but you know what? In the end, I just had to sit it out and just wait and wait and wait. And then what happened in America was, when eventually enough people left more reviews and it tipped back up to 4.5. Okay. That was when I'm thinking the ads really started to come into their own. And then there was a lot of hand research there. I mean, keyword research. I just spent quite a long time looking at books that were similar and creating keyword ads, targeting them. And again, thinking about those search terms. And this was very much pre-Publisher Rocket, really. Or maybe it was in its very early days then. So, but I would say it does come down to being relevant, and then that's helped the ads. But the story, I think there is just something about that story that children love. It's a sort of, it's like Downton Abbey for children with a bit of magic thrown in, Nice. I think that's how you describe it.
Well,
really.
It's abundantly clear the readers like it. So despite what that 1-star person said there, that's so funny. Yes. I just relate so much.
Occasionally I get them saying I can't spell because, of course, it's got UK spelling.
Oh gosh! So here we go.
I've now got. I now have.
You spell color with a U in it. What are you doing?
Yes, I know. I now have on the inside cover, on the title page or the copyright page, this book uses UK spelling. I just thought to try and, you have to, So,
One final question here. If you had to start all over again, what's one thing you'd do differently in your self-publishing journey?
And I tell this to children when I go into schools. The Secret Lake is only 22,500 words long. And by the way, that might have something to do with it's not too long, which accident rather than design. But I didn't plan it. I had the idea. I got the inspiration in this Notting Hill garden. I started writing and I went round and round in circles. And it took me something like 9 months to come up with the first draft. Whereas the sequels, which are behind me there somewhere, they're each, one is 52,000 words. The second one's 62,000.
Wow.
They're very recent. There was a 10-year gap between that one coming out and these next two. I had a plan for those because and I found certainly when you're doing time travel, it gets very confusing. And so, I mean, for my self-publishing stuff, I know you have people who are discovery writers or plotters, but certainly for me, I would have said to myself, if I went back to the beginning, actually think about making a plan, even however high level it is. Don't get too carried away. It just sort of, I could have saved myself quite a lot of pain, I think, at that time.
Very good.
So, but I would always say, the other thing I would always say is, test your story, make sure people like it, and before you and obviously use editors and a professional approach to everything before you publish.
Well, Karen, our time has went by so fast. I could easily spend a couple hours just chatting your head off. This has been so much fun. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, they can, if they're for self-publishing, if they go to selfpublishingadventures.com, they can see my website. Now, I do, as you know, have two books out, How to Self-Publish and Market a Children's Book and How to Market a Children's Book. And I would say those are both very evergreen, even though the second edition was 2021. I would say not much has changed apart from the fact we have Book Vault and TikTok. And particularly the marketing side of it, I would just say is very much, up to date or rather relevant, including all the information on Amazon ads. If they have children and they want to look at, or they just want to have a look at my children's books, it's KarenInglisAuthor.com. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Karen.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dale.
You've been listening to the Branding, Marketing, and Promotion stream of the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast with Dale L. Roberts. This podcast is sponsored by Book Vault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with Book Vault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.